Today marks a shift from our focus on understanding systemic racism to promoting social justice. So the first two sessions, if you've attended, I hope that you've learned more about systemic racism, from understanding definitions to the way in which our country was built with systemic racism at its core. So having laid the groundwork that racism of the systemic nature is a part of the American history, it seems fitting and a reasonable next step to shift this series towards addressing what can we do about that? How do we promote social justice with that at the core of what we're talking about? So today is the first of two sessions that will focus on the promotion of social justice. Specifically, today's session will look at how to dismantle systems of oppression in our efforts to move towards social justice. Our speakers will focus specifically on addressing systems of oppression in the domain of the natural sciences, as well as career and unemployment. In keeping with intentionally including all aspects of our community, today's session, as did all the others, will include a faculty lecture, a presentation from a student affairs staff member, and the experiences of Stockton students as it relates to today's topic. As always, there will also be an integration of music that captures the movement towards social justice and a question and answer with the presenters. Before I introduce our first speaker, I would like to acknowledge the political juncture in which we are currently standing and invite each of you to view this space as one in which we can all unite in the hope for collective action towards justice, not blaming any individual person or creed, not fueling a political divide, but simply coming together, to really move towards a spirit of empathy and compassion to better understand how we can move towards a better future for our country. At this time, before I introduce our first speaker, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Christopher Katchen, our Vice President of Student Affairs, who will have a few remarks before our speaker begins.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and welcome to the most recent addition to the Campus Conversations, a Collective Action Series. As Nordia spoke about, there have been a number of substantive, really important, timely conversations that have been had in this really important space on our campus at this pivotal time in our country and in our community. And we're really glad that everyone is taking their time out to be a part of this type of a dialogue and conversation, because our community and social justice within our community is extremely important. So I hope that you enjoyed this conversation and find it helpful as you have the others, and stay on the lookout for more. We're going to have, shameless plug, we're going to have a conversation towards the end of the week, post-election, around some of these conversations as well, because we want to pivot and think about how do we continue to promote social justice post-election. So stay tuned for more information on that. And again, thank you for a few moments, Dr. Johnson, to welcome the community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Katchen. With that, I am pleased to welcome our first speaker. Dr. Gordon Reeves is an assistant professor of chemistry at Stockton. He earned his doctorate in inorganic chemistry from Drexel University and an MBA from Fairleigh Dickinson University. His doctoral research focused on the development of novel luminescent metal complexes for the use of biological probes. He completed his postdoctoral fellowship at the Perelman School of Medicine of the University of Pennsylvania, studying the chemistry of copper proteins and their link to Alzheimer's disease. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Reeves. Please give him your attention at this time.
So I'm going to share my screen with you. And if it let me do that. Okay, so today my talk is on systemic racism in the sciences. And this is a transition from the promoting social justice aspect of the previous work into dismantling systems of oppression. And of course, this is important to me because I'm a Black scientist working in STEM fields. So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about in regards to systemic racism, I've actually experienced firsthand. So first off, let me tell you what I'm going to tell you. All right. So I'm going to cover three things today. I'm going to cover historic scientific racism and how the thoughts of the past still make their way into today's thinking and color the nature of racism today in the sciences. Then I'm going to give you some examples of current systemic racism taken from my experiences and experiences of people I know. And lastly, I want to give you some solutions which will tie back to the notion of social justice. So just to make a call back to the original work, let's look at social justice again, okay? So definition is the view that everyone deserves equal economic, political, social rights and opportunities. And there are four basic tenets that go along with social justice. First is access to resources. So ensure that everyone has the access to goods and services needed for them to thrive. Next up is equity, to ensure that those goods and services are distributed equally amongst the people who need them. Third up is participation. The people have the right to be active in the decisions that affect their lives. And lastly, we're upholding basic human rights. All right, so that's my call back to the first set of talks. We're going to talk about these. You'll see them show up again throughout my talk going forward. All right, so let's talk about scientific racism. Now, for a 15-minute talk, there's so much I can talk about because science and racism go hand in hand. I'm going to pull a few key things out and talk about them and show you how they transition in today's society. So the most egregious form of this was biological racism. And this was the use of pseudoscience and baseless claims about biology to justify racism in America and across the world. This was primarily promoted by European scholars as a means of assuaging their guilt when they were going about doing their colonizing and their enslaving. If I can prove the person I'm trying to oppress isn't as human as I am, I don't have that guilt on my shoulders. So a couple different ways they did this. A bunch of different pseudoscience things they used: craniometry, phrenology, and anthropometry. All of those look at, for example, the shape and size of the head or the brain of the body and use that to justify their issue with race. And this first found footing around 1600, expanded widely in the 19th century. And then it kind of slowed down after World War II, but it kept going. It's still pretty pervasive right now. Like I said, used to justify slavery in the Americas, colonization in Western Africa, and also South African apartheid. And what they would say was this: there were two main thoughts here among many, that the small brain and the small blood vessels of the African made him more inclined to racism and wanting to escape captivity. And also the darkness of their skin, the amount of melanin they had, made them more resistant to pain and more sexually active. So you had two things, especially in American racism, especially slavery, that helped justify the buck system of slavery, having slaves breed to create more slaves and have them toiling in the fields because it's in their genetic makeup to be, to not have any issues with that. Suddenly after that, though, you see the rise of eugenics. All of a sudden, we're trying now to use reproduction to increase the chances of bringing out desirable characteristics in humanity. Essentially, we're trying to breed out all the unwanted things. And this takes hold and skyrockets up until Hitler gets a hold of it. All right, and post-World War II, once again, you see that all of a sudden fall off. Now, I bring this up because even though we've debunked all these things, this mindset still exists. All right, look at Dylann Roof, who killed the 9 folks in South Carolina in that church. In his manifesto, he relates back to these physical changes. All right, so even though this is long debunked, this is still pervasive and it still plays a role in current racism. In fact, let's look at healthcare. So the fact that you can automatically deem someone less worthy than you, okay, means you don't take an active role in making sure they can thrive. So when it comes to medicine in America, especially with Black test subjects, there's always been racism present. And there are two major cases among many. The first is the HeLa cell. The HeLa cell being the oldest and most used cell line, especially important in the in initial polio vaccine trials and numerous cancer trials. Well, these cells came from the dead body of Henrietta Lacks, a woman who had died of cancer, Black woman. Here's the thing. For as much as these cells have been used, her family was never compensated for their use. They were used without authorization, no consent, and the family were given no access to the records. Now, it was deemed in the courts that once you die, your cells and your genetics were fair game, okay? But to have these HeLa cells be so important to the nature of medicine today, and her folks never get compensated, is a shame. But we did see the common rule formed in 1981, which now requires informed consent from doctors when they're going to be harvesting genetic information from people. But prior to that, right, all of the work her cells did, no compensation. And then the biggest one, and my grandfather, who was a Tuskegee graduate in 1940, told me about this himself. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Essentially, there were 600 poor sharecroppers in Alabama, and this was the Public Health Service, along with Tuskegee University, trying to garner funds to help people with syphilis. Right? They brought these people in and they were treating them, but eventually ran out of funding, and the program stopped. The program was supposed to last for 6 months, but lasted full of 4 years. Excuse me. In that time, they had stopped treating these folks with syphilis and started observing them going through death, knowing full well that there had been a cure for syphilis, all right, via penicillin, as far back as 1947, all right, a mere 15 years into their study. They kept this going for 40 years. So that's just one example of the notion of inferiority being passed down, not as vocal, but still present, right? And in general, you see a lack of there's a lack of genetic information out there on non-whites. So when it comes to treating conditions experienced by minorities, there's not a lot of information out there. And oftentimes you find that sickness and illness in minority communities goes untreated or misdiagnosed. And you see this now with Black women carrying children to term or having babies. There's a large chance that they will die, all right, in childbirth, or their children will. And it comes down to a lack of care from their doctors, because there's an inherent belief that they're not worthy of that care. So take it one step further, right? This is still there. Let's talk about race and intelligence. This was the foundation of a lot of the eugenics work before. And I'm taking now into the late 20th century. In 1991, Herstein and Murray released a book called The Bell Curve, linking IQ to race and wealth and social behavior, trying to develop what they call the cognitive elite. And based upon their study, they deemed that the Ashkenazi Jew was the most intelligent, while the Hispanic was the least. And throughout that spectrum, you had the modern European, you had the Sephardic Jew, you had the Arab, you had the Black, you had the East Asian, but essentially trying to link IQ to race when there's no direct correlation. This was widely denounced, but look at this though. Despite that, James Watson, all right, who along with Francis Crick are the godfathers of DNA. They didn't discover it, but they were instrumental in getting it out there. This is 2007. He's saying this about Black folks. He's inherently gloomy about the prospect of Africa. He says all of our social policies are based on the fact that their intelligence is the same as ours, whereas all the testing says not really. But we've already debunked that, right? But here's the next thing. He said there was a natural desire that human beings should want to be equal, but people who have to deal with Black employees find this not true. So this is, all right, a world-renowned scientist in the 21st century saying this. Now, of course, you can say he was 79 years old at the time. He was old, but hold on. Here's the problem with that age argument. He's had research students who worked under him. He's had children and grandchildren who's passed this belief down to. Now, they may not be as vocal as him, but they're still holding on to it. All right, so this scientific racism now plays a part in how people are treated when they're going for positions in the sciences. All right, so let me move from scientific racism on to systemic racism and show you how this behavior, this belief, this thought process infects the current system. Look at this. All right. We have this general view of the science being objective, all right? It's objectivity in the sciences. But here's the issue with that. Because of that thought, okay, a lack of diversity in the sciences is blamed on the minority scientists for not being able to adapt, all right, or not having the discipline required to thrive. All right? It's no longer the racism there, it's the victim's fault for not being able to thrive. What happens is that if the person who's in charge has that mentality, he or she is not going to do their best to be a mentor. He or she is not going to do their best to promote you going further. Right? And it causes minority students, especially Black students, to have to choose between advancement in the sciences and their own identity. Right? It leads to isolation and mental and physical health crises. So there's a study here, 2007 Pew Research study, where they're asking Black and Latino folks who work in STEM, all right, what are they experiencing as far as racism goes? And 62% of them said they experienced some kind of discrimination, all right? But the first three are the ones that you see the most often in regards to complaints. One, we're treated as though they were not competent. Now, that isn't based upon their actual work. It's based upon a preconceived notion that goes back 4 centuries in the sciences, all right? They're deemed inferior before they even start, so no one puts the effort in to allow them to thrive. They felt isolated in their workplace. This speaks to the lack of minorities in STEM positions. Right? I can speak to that to some degree as me being the only one in the chemistry department. And then earning less than a coworker doing the same exact job. Right? And I'll talk about this a little bit later when I talk about salary and hiring disparities. But I want to bring your attention to Craig Chapman. And this is, looking back at the overt racism that was out there before. Craig Chapman was a white chemistry professor at University of New Hampshire. And he was hiding on Twitter, pretending to be a woman of color, all right, in order to harass other women of color and Black Lives Matter supporters in the LGBTQ community. And his goal was to remove all vestiges of woke culture from his department's policies. Now, here's the thing, and I'll show you the article if you allow me to. One second, I apologize for that. So this is the article from the Inside Higher Ed. And can you see it? Okay, perfect. All right. So Craig Chapman was hiding as someone called the science STEM. And this is one of the comments he made when people were saying, hey, you're trolling, you're not actually a woman of color. All right. So this is the thing. He's hiding behind this, guys. He's hiding behind this. Imagine if you weren't hiding. Imagine if it's all out to be seen, okay? Now, here's the interesting thing about Craig Chapman. If you take a look at his background, PhD from the University of Oregon, but he got his bachelor's in science from good old Stockton University. So that's homegrown. That's homegrown bias. So you're not even safe where you are right now. Think about that. But enough about that. Let's go back to how this kind of bias can affect how people can thrive, especially Black and Latino students can thrive in the sciences. Okay. So there's an overall lack of diversity, and here's why we see this happening. These 3 studies are taken from that same 2017 study where they were polling Black and Latino students. And the first 2 state that especially Black students and Black people in STEM, feel there's too little diversity where they work. And they feel that there's no attention being given to their need for diversity. And that's heavily seen amongst the Black and the Hispanic students. All right. And that lack of caring goes back to that objectivity I was telling you about. The person in charge who comes from that thinking, right, doesn't see the issue of racism. They see the person as just not being able to cope and thrive for whatever reason it may be. All right? So that's the issue. So if Craig Chapman was hiding, imagine all the ones who are in plain sight but just not saying anything. Imagine how much of that older pervasive knowledge is sitting in their heads now, influencing how they move and groove, right? Directly affecting how Blacks and Hispanics are able to thrive in the sciences. In this third here, this lists a series of reasons why Blacks and Hispanics feel as though there is a lack of involvement, right, in the STEM fields from us. And the first three are interesting. The first one says, less likely to have access to quality education, prepare them for these fields. Now, when the article goes on to talk about what this means, there's a lack of advanced science courses being offering to students in the inner cities. And then once again falls on that initial bias where what's the point in giving them what they need if they're not going to do anything with it anyway, right? It falls in that original bias. Second thing, not encouraged to pursue these subjects at an early age. This is interesting. Since 1970, it's been a major Black-led push, right, to push STEM into the Black community. And we've seen increasing numbers up until about 2017. All of a sudden, 2017, we see Black folks leaving STEM and going to the social sciences. And to some degree, that's to do with the current political climate, but it's also a safety, all right, in being in a field where people can relate. The sciences being one of many, it's hard for students to relate to that and stay in that. And lastly, they're less likely to think they would succeed in these fields. This ties right back to the very first thing. With a lack of education, all right, not getting the resources you need, resources going back to one of the four aspects of social justice, you don't feel as though you can thrive. This all ties back to a system of oppression that's kind of keeping you in this thinking. And for my last two slides, especially when it comes to this topic, let's talk about salary disparity and hiring disparity. So salary disparities. Now, this is all things being equal. These are Blacks, whites, Asians, all in the sciences with the same level of training, all right, from undergrad to grad to postdoc, all right, the same level of experience too. And we find that Blacks and Hispanics, and Hispanic population is also including Black Hispanic. Right? Hispanic ethnicity is including Black Hispanics and white Hispanics as well. But the Black and Hispanic community sees much less in regards to income, even though they have the same exact experience and training as their Asian and white counterparts. So S&E occupations, science and engineering occupations, right? S&E related, this is things like computer programming, coding, machinists, people that help the science and engineering occupations thrive. And then even in the non-science engineering occupations, we see the same thing, right? The Black and Hispanic groups are paid dramatically less, right? And for my last talk about on this, let's talk about hiring disparities, okay? For, once again, everything being held equal, same training, all right, same education, same background, you find that white men and white women are the most hired in science and engineering occupations. All right? Now, part of this can be said that, this can be due to the fact that there are fewer entrants coming into the market from the Black and Hispanic community, but that's not really the case. You oftentimes find that Blacks and Hispanics apply for these positions at a higher rate than their white counterparts and still don't garner the positions they need. So with that being said, I want to tie this back to the sensitive racism by saying the thoughts of old, though they may change their form, they still exist. It may not be overt, right? But there's something in the mentality of people who are running things that holds the Black and brown back even now. So with all the negatives, let's close off with solutions. So there are two really awesome articles you should read. The first is White Coats, Black Scientists in the Harvard Business Review. And the second is What Black Scientists Want from Colleagues and Institutions from Nature. There are two categories I want to address in regards to solutions, and I'll end on this. First off, if you want to make some change here, first of all, acknowledge science's racist past and present. Acknowledge that the bias is there, all right? Acknowledge that you may have some biases of your own, and actively work with someone else to help you, right? Acknowledge the plight of the minority. Don't cast outside and say, well, you can't thrive just because you can't swim, you can't manage. There's something there, and it's been there for centuries, all right? Talk to them, listen to them, let them tell you what the move to be. There are far too many minorities in STEM right now. Sorry, too few minorities in STEM right now. And when it comes to STEM education, there are too few minorities teaching STEM education. So when people do teach, when a European teacher does teach it, he teaches from a European standpoint. I teach the Black Scientists and Inventors course here at Stockton. You'll hear about scientists that you've never known about from across the diaspora, but you won't get this in a standard classroom setting. To get around that, start bringing in more minority professors. All right. Also, check your implicit bias. Check what's in your heart. Right? You know how you feel about things. You know how sometimes you may be wrong in your feeling. All right? Check that. Try your best to stop stereotyping people. All right? And try your best to be understanding. And then on the grand scheme of policy, right, start pushing diversity initiatives. Right? When it comes to hiring, the hiring disparity, cluster hiring is something that's been done recently in some schools on the West Coast. So advertising multiple faculty positions at one time. By doing this, you're more likely to get a larger minority applicant pool. And then when you're hiring for these pools, start including more minority representation on your hiring and funding committees. And this doesn't apply to sciences. This goes back to all aspects. So here's my social justice tie-in. If you want to start breaking down these walls, start adhering to those 4 tenets of social justice. Provide everybody access to the things they need, right? Resources. 2, make sure everyone has everything equally, equity. 3, allow people to participate in the things they need. If you want to increase your number of minority faculty, start adding them to your hiring committees. And lastly, check your bias to ensure you're not impeding anybody's human rights. Right? And that is my talk for the day.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Reeves. Let's give him a Zoom hand clap. Use your reactions and feel free. Thank you so much. I'm just watching the chats, and it's clear that the students as well as our colleagues are getting quite a bit from what you shared. So thank you once again. You know, Dr. Reeves mentioned that we need to first acknowledge it, right? He also talks about the fact that it may look different, but these are old thoughts. That goes right back to this idea of what we're talking about being systemic, right? So oftentimes we get caught up in arguments and disagreements about these concepts with individuals. But the problem is, if we continue to focus at the individual level, the systems that perpetuate these things are never addressed. And so I encourage you all to utilize the solutions that Dr. Reeves shared with us. Go crack open some of these amazing resources that he shared to really educate yourself, so that we can really begin to address these issues at the systemic level. Because the fact is, if we don't address it at that level, we run the risk of continuously perpetuating some of these issues that we continue to see in different forms, from now all the way back to slavery, as we saw in our very first community conversation in September. So if you have questions for Dr. Reeves, hold on to them. You will have a moment to ask questions a little bit later. This is now our opportunity to listen to some music and have it, kind of cement some of what you're learning from our presenters today. Our first selection may be new to many of you. It is what you may refer to as an old school song, but it certainly still captures a lot of what is going on right now. What's talked about in the video, there's nothing old about it. So listen up. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And then if you've been with me in previous sessions, you know that you'll have an opportunity to pick the next song based on the Zoom polls. All right. It's always my least favorite time when I have to stop those songs and those videos short. If it piqued your interest, please go ahead and find it. That was What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. And many of you may or may not have heard the song before. There's a line where he says, war is not the answer because only love can conquer hate. And as we enter, as I mentioned first, into this political season that is scary for many of us, I encourage you to reflect on that line, that only love can conquer hate. And we're here today to have this conversation as a collective, wanting to move towards a more hopeful future for our country. So please consider reflecting on that. The next song is also, the next options are also quite powerful. So I'm going to launch the poll and give you an opportunity to vote. And then, as always, I will surprise you with your selection. Please go ahead and select your favorite or the one you are most interested in at this time. All right, I see that most of you have voted, just giving everybody else an opportunity to do so. Thank you for casting your vote. I hope you'll do the same in this presidential election. All right, most of you have now voted, and I personally always get excited when you guys pick my favorite, which is the case today. So let me go ahead and play our second selection. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. The final part of that song, I think, is, again, another great piece to reflect on in terms of the fact that it's not over. What we're all fighting towards is not over. What we're moving towards individually and collectively is something that we still have work to do with regards to. So I invite you to listen to these songs when you need some encouragement, when you need something to move you towards, and remember what we're fighting for as a collective. So thank you again for your attention to these pieces of art. Excuse me. Thank you again for paying attention to those songs. I hope you enjoyed them. And at this time, I have the distinct pleasure of actually turning things over to Marcus Johnson, the Associate Director of Marcus Johnson actually has a new title. And so I'm going to allow Marcus to introduce himself. He has been phenomenal in working with me and a number of other folks on the planning team for this entire series. And it's my distinct pleasure to have him just make a few remarks and then go ahead and introduce our next speaker.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marcus Johnson. I'm the Director of Residential Education and Student Services. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for allowing me to be here and to speak on behalf of our next speaker. It brings me great pleasure to introduce this next person, a friend and phenomenal colleague, someone who carries themselves with such grace and decorum and so poised and just has so much to offer to the institution. It's certainly been a pleasure for me to work with her over the last year or so. We have Dr. Terry Carr, who is our Director of Career Education and Development, where she partners with students, faculty, and staff and employers to facilitate conversations to help students achieve post-graduation success. Dr. Carr comes to us, I guess she's been with us since December of 2018, but if you were to speak with her and listen to everything that she has to offer, one would assume she's been here much longer. Prior to Stockton, Dr. Carr had the honor and privilege of working for Allegheny College, a small private college located in Pennsylvania. There, she served as the Associate Director for Employer Relations and Career Education. During her 4 years tenure at Allegheny, she had an opportunity to explore and sharpen her ability to provide equitable career support and racially minoritized students. To fortify her efforts to support Black and Latinx students, she studied how to help racially minoritized students access and build their social networks with intentionality. To that, she completed her research and received her doctorate in education from the University of Pittsburgh in 2019. Please join me in giving a very warm Stockton welcome to Dr. Terry Carr.
Well, thank you. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I'd like to first say thank you, Dr. Johnson, for this opportunity. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for Marcus for such a beautiful bio and reading that for me. And your sentiments and friendship and colleagueship has been wonderful here in my time here at Stockton. To all of those colleagues out there, thank you so much for your support in this moment. I'd like to also thank Dr. Reeves for being my partner on this. And the other presenters, Dr. Kalabatsiva, I hope I said that okay, Dr. Allison and Dr. Rodriguez, thank you. I looked at your presentations and was both moved and motivated by them all. I have taken notes. Ubiquitous notes are everywhere, just as Dr. Reeves was speaking and as I was watching those videos. The one thing that kind of goes along with my part in this dismantling of systematic oppression, I already have a serious face, and so that helps me present this message pretty well because this is a very serious matter. So I will start my presentation, period. So because I think it's important that you visualize some of this important data, because you have to get this data in your system so you understand what your responsibility will be for your end and what we're trying to do on our end to support your success. So the one thing that I want you to, are you seeing anything?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. Okay, we're just not gonna hit it in the presentation mode. You just got to rock with it like this. So the one thing that I wanted to make sure that you saw was that these were the headlines over the past few years. Blacks and Latinx folks are twice as likely to be unemployed, and honestly unemployed at any education level. That's the bottom line to it. So those that have education, 4-year, master's and doctorate, we are twice as likely to be unemployed compared to white counterparts, okay? With that said, if you do not have an education, you're probably going to lean more to the abject poverty status than anything else. So we can say that education doesn't mean anything, but essentially in this time, it does if we're trying to just eat. I'm gonna talk to you, I've got like 9 minutes to cram this all in. So I'm just gonna throw a few terms at you so that you make sure that you understand what's happening. And then I will probably just chunk out some of the larger concepts so that you'll understand them. So the first few terms I want you to understand is I use the term racially minoritized students. And what that means, thank you, Dr. Johnston. Okay, cool. What that means is, that comes from Benitez, 2010, the actual idea of being a student of color, a person of color, or a minority is a noun. What we are minoritized, which is an action that was placed upon us, right? Societal norms of discrimination. So we are not minorities. We have been minoritized by a larger population of people. Latinx, the terms I'll use to be an inclusive identifier. And social networks, you'll hear the word social networks or networks. In this case, it means people that are socially, economically, politically connected with one another and share those resources. So it's not social networks as in Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Those are not what we're talking about today. We're talking about people that have social capital. And I didn't put social capital on here, so I apologize for that. Bootstraps. I want you to understand clearly that bootstraps is a political, rhetorical term that tells us that we have to be self-reliant to succeed and elevate ourselves without any help. And to that, I say it's a lie and it's gaslighting. And gaslighting is a technique used to to create deception and manipulation, right? And it creates this type of fog, and it keeps that person confused with the truth and thought what right or wrong is, what the reality of a situation is. And so with that, the idea of bootstrapping is a myth. The bootstrapping is not something that really can be done. It's actually, we all need someone to get through. So the one thing that I want you to understand is that, so Career Services aims to facilitate the college to career transition for all students. Our sole mission is to cultivate occupational insight through programs and services that prepare you to be successful upon your transition. In the larger context and on unemployment, in 2018, the unemployment rate was as low as it had been in 6 years, and that was at 2.7%. Whites in that time period were unemployed at 2.4, which is below the national average. Blacks, unfortunately, were at a 4.1% unemployment rate and a 3.7 unemployment rate for Latinx folks. And little changed in 2019, and those are folks that have bachelor's degrees. So please pay attention to that, because it's important to understand that when we powerhouse through our education just to receive education, we've missed a lot of really important resources we need to be successful. And that's part of my research, is part of dismantling this tight hold on why we're not getting jobs after graduation. So this is data right before, let me see if this is before, okay, yes, this is before COVID hit. And as you can see, we have the unemployment rate where Blacks are, it's just a visual depiction here where we're twice as likely to be unemployed, less through education. So less than high school, some college, and then in college you have 3.5 for Blacks and then 2.2 for white graduates. Over here on this side, we have, and this came from data that they gathered from the unemployment rate during COVID. So of course you're going to see this massive increase in numbers, right? But we're still highly disproportionately unemployed. And with this number, as you can see over to my right, maybe your left, that this is going to impact Latinx women the most. So why is all of this important? Because right now, the unemployment rate during the pandemic, Black workers are 13% still more unemployed than white workers in the pandemic as it stands. Right. So why is this important? This is important because although considerable research has been done, has been paid attention and devoted to the idea of the unemployment discrepancies plaguing Black and Latinx people, the unsettling result is that there is no clear explanation as to why the disparities exist, other than race, racism, and the racial implications upon which the United States is structured. As Dr. Johnson stated earlier, it's the building to which our country is built on. So it makes sense that we're disproportionately unemployed. The researchers may not have been able to definitively discover why we fail to secure gainful and meaningful jobs. But I think Dr. Reeves touched on that earlier when he talked about this, assigned value or inferiority being passed down. So the idea that we are less intelligent or that we're victims of our own situations, which we know that's not true. To put it plainly, racial discrimination remains a prominent factor in preventing Black and Latinx graduates from securing meaningful and gainful employment upon graduation. Therefore, this matter could not be dismissed by higher education leaders such as myself under the idea of serving all students objectively and equally. And so, as we know that it's not equality we seek, it's equity. We need to make sure that everyone is on a playing field so sorry, that works where we have to meet where we are. So all of us are not working with the same handicap, and we need to make sure that we are accommodating what some students need more so than others. And I'll get to that shortly. As we see here, what I wanted to examine in my study was how career services could help Black and Latinx students access, build, and expand their capital. You'll hear this. Capital are the tools and relationships needed to be successful post-graduation transition, in your post-graduation transition. The idea that you're accessing, building capital, what does that mean? When you get to the institution, to the college, to the university, you actually inherit a whole lot of resources and connections that you haven't tapped into or don't know to tap into just yet. And so we have to make sure that our office, our partners in the community are encouraging you to make these connections, and that we are actually being intentional in what we provide for you. What's being said is that unfortunately, racially minoritized students are forced to navigate a culture that was not intentionally intended for them. Get a load of that. It was not intentionally designed for you. So of course, we're going to struggle when it's time to graduate, unless we make intentional decisions to build relationships. To illustrate, Park Yancey explicitly argued that career development is even more imperative for racially minoritized students because they tend to come to college with fewer social capital resources and social ties than their white counterparts. Arguably, it has long-term effects because of racism and white supremacy. We have to make sure that students understand the challenges and the impact of race and racism on the educational structure and practices and the discourse, and as it pertains to the labor market, right? It didn't go away. I think Dr. Allison said, none of this is a coincidence. All of this can be targeted. Okay, I'm moving as fast as I can. So here's a picture that I found, and it struck me, and I hope you can see this very well. When we're talking about the social ladder, the social capital ladder, this is the ability to increase your influence, increase your money, and increase the ability to have power. This is a demonstration on the other side. Like, I'm left-handed, so I'm always going to say it wrong. On the left side of this picture, there's a person that is getting up the ladder fairly quickly because they have more rungs, right? And the person on the other side doesn't have a lot of rungs. And it's very hard for them to get up on the first rung. Imagine how hard it will be to get to the other rungs. This is what happens when you don't have relationships. This is what happens when you don't have the idea to set a firm goal, to understand what your goal is going to be, and to go after it, and to be able to speak to it so others can help you. You need champions. This person over here had champions. And so that's what I see the rungs are. These are the people that we need to help us with each small baby step to our goals. This is the idea, once again, bootstraps. He has no boots to strap, right? He needs help to get on the ladder. And for the most part, most Black and Latinx students, we need help getting on the ladder. And we need help continuously to stay on the ladder and move up as far as we need to be successful. Dr. Johnson, keep me straight and narrow. All right.
You're good. This is good stuff.
Okay. So in my research, I had two questions that I wanted to answer. I wanted to know, how could a career services office offer a program for racially minoritized students to help them access and build their social networks to support their post-graduation success? So essentially what it boils down to this, bottom line, I wanted to know, how could career services intentionally inject the ability for Black and Latinx students to start building networks quickly? More than just mentorship. Mentorship is a slow burn. What I wanted to make sure is that all of our students, as many as would participate, How do we get them connected to other people that will help them with their goals? Perfect. And the second question is, you'll see institutional agents. And what I call institutional agents were actually alumni of color. They are the people that were able to get us moving in this direction to help us connect the students participating in this work. Just to give you some background on where we were and what the literature says and where we're going. As it pertains to career services, historically, Black and Latinx people were never considered and were not recognized as part of career vocation. In the 1900s up to 1920, the historical role of career services served the white majority population. And so with that, those served those Slavic races coming from Europe, Poland, Austria, Hungary, Russia, and Italy as immigrants. By that time, we were free. But we still, coming out of slavery, did not have a vocational support to move us into the spaces that would help us thrive. In 1914, the GI Bill started to be used by returning soldiers from World War II, where Black soldiers were denied their access to use their GI Bill. The Black soldiers were not allowed to use their GI Bill for housing and or education. Therefore, they did not receive the career services or vocational care that they would have received on the university's campuses. I'm going to move quickly through this. Where we've been and where we're going. Structurally, it is stated from research across the board. Typically, higher education, career service centers typically do not have social justice missions dedicated to equitable work, and I'm here to change that. My goal is to make sure that we're doing equitable work to support students where they are. Let's see, I'm gonna move from there. Now, here are some findings. So here's what I did. I created a model of career circles, and it involved 5 to 7 students and alumni of color to aid as coaches, career coaches. And they talked about how to set goals, what it means to transition as a person of color, how to make it through the institution you're currently in as a person of color, what barriers comes with that. And what I found interesting about Dr. Reeves' report was that, or his talk, was that one of the major reasons that folks did not see that they faced discrimination in the recruiting process it was a small percentage. They didn't find that it was a big deal. It is a very big deal. It does happen. Just because you can't see it, it's that covert, right? We're taking all of these conversations we've been having, they're coming together. You should be able to see them piece by piece and understand that all of it is coming together, and it affects and it's ingrained, inherent in everything that you do, from education to transitioning out into the workplace, regardless if you're going into grad school or straight into the workforce. So the outcomes for my work was that students had to be willing to share their attitudes about transitioning out. So they had to get together and actually talk about what that meant. What did it look like, if they were even talking about it at all? They needed space to self-reflect and think critically about the whole process. It is not enough to put blinders on. I'm telling you, to go to class and have a little fun. College is a great place to grow and learn, but it's also the best place for you to start being strategic about what's happening next. And then also recognizing their support systems, and then discovering that the program that they were in was very significant to their development for accessing and building social networks, right? And then, of course, the other part of my question, alumni of color was vital to the learning. Now, granted, sometimes a resume building is a resume building, period. Doesn't matter what color you are, that's the way it's going to go, unless we're talking about some cultural stuff that we can put in or take out or whatever that looks like. But coming from someone that looks like you or somebody gets it, like the trust value goes up, right? The trust value as a community of people of color, we have trust issues, y'all. We have trust issues. And it has to be from someone we really know or things that we think they have our best interests at heart. So having these career circles with these alumni of color were very detrimental in providing some basic services and learning how to just do professional communication skills, learning how to do the how-tos. Something that you may not come to. If I blast it out to everyone like I do career fair, you may or may not come, you may or may not think it's for you. But if I say I'm hosting Blacks in STEM this month in National Career Development Month, your ears perk up. You're like, oh, I might be a little interested in that, to see what other alumni who are in the STEM field or other professionals have to say. So that type of equitable work, that type of intentionality is crucial in higher ed, particularly for career services, and particularly for you to pay attention to what you need. I'm going to skip over that and go right to this. The implications for you, the implications for us. Colleges and universities, we need to challenge the universal model that race-neutral and white-centered work works. That has to be challenged. We have to change that. We have to intentionally build opportunities that provide accelerated access to social, for Black and Latinx students to build social networks. That has to be a thing. We can't sit back and go, well, they don't want to come or they don't want to do this or they don't want to do that. The culture of that has to change, and it starts a little bit at a time. You grow, you plant the seed and grow the roots, and it'll get bigger and it'll grow larger, and it becomes part of the culture. We want to help racially minoritized students leverage their community and cultural wealth. Not coming at this from a deficit at all. We have a lot of value as Black and brown people. Our communities and our families means everything to us. We also have to add that there are other allies outside of that can support our efforts to get in certain arenas and places that we want to be, because sometimes our folks are limited in what they can offer, right? And for you as a student, I challenge you to challenge yourself to be able to do self-reflection and think critically about your post-graduation goals. Stretch your comfort zone, ask questions, learn from professionals around you, your faculty, your staff members, someone that you've just kind of taken a hold to, listen, and then connect to alumni. I'm gonna say this a million times, connect to alumni, connect to alumni. They've done it. They've been there, done that, and will be able to help you. And then intentionally build and take advantage of opportunities that provide accelerated access to social networks. Whenever you see an opportunity, take advantage of it. Learn what you don't know, because I'll guarantee you don't know. If those numbers of unemployment are so high, whether before the COVID or not, I think that it's because we are not doing our due diligence to make connections and build relationships. Because I'm telling you, that is what other people are doing. Non-Black and Latinx folks talk to each other. They hire one another. They hire so-and-so's niece and nephew because they keep this close connection in terms of relationship building. We need to start that. That needs to be normalized. And then lastly, be open to receive help and leverage your cultural capital as a racially minoritized person, like I said, in conjunction with building social networks. Okay. I'm gonna leave you with this. This is blessed. If you have not been watching the news, this is trash. They don't think that we want to be successful. And that's permeating through the culture, through our society. And so it is incumbent on you to take responsibility and be intentional about your success, and let us help you do it. And I don't mean just career services, because there's only 4 of us, but the entire campus community, right? We owe you your success, and you owe it to yourself to be successful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carr. Thank you. Please give Dr. Carr a virtual round of applause. We appreciate this data that you've brought to light. It is critical. And although it may have been shocking or maybe even depressing to some of the students of color on the Zoom today, I hope that you have listened to Dr. Carr's critical suggestion as it relates to networking, particularly in using your network to advance your success. So thank you once more, Dr. Carr. In the interest of time, I'm going to move forward to our question and answer. We'll have about 5 minutes or so. If you have a question for either of our speakers, please take this opportunity to ask at this time. Please feel free to use the raise hand feature or go ahead and unmute yourself. Or if you're having audio troubles, you can also use the chat. Any questions for either of our speakers at this time? I hear shuffling. I can't tell if it's someone trying to speak or otherwise. Well, I did see that there were quite a bit of communication happening in the chat in regards to both of your presentations. So it's clear to me that the students as well as our colleagues have learned a bit from your talks. And so I'd like to thank you both once more. Students or faculty staff members, if you have questions, feel free to ask at this time. Also, keep in mind that both of our speakers are Stockton faculty and staff members. So if you're intrigued by the work that they're doing, please feel free to reach out to them, connect with them, and keep this conversation going beyond this forum. All right, if there are no questions, I'm going to move us right along again in the interest of time. This is one of my personal favorites, an opportunity to hear from our students. I'm going to once more turn things over to Marcus Johnson, who will introduce each of our RAs, who will have a few minutes to share their narrative specifically related to today's topic.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and thank you again to Dr. Reeves and Dr. Carr for your very healthy and thorough presentations. I'm sure our students and faculty and staff learned a lot from them. As Dr. Johnson mentioned, this is one of our favorite parts of the program where we get to be able to give you all some time to hear from your peers, some of our own shining stars, some of our students here at the institution. And I'm not going to take up too much of your time. The first is one of our fabulous RAs, someone who is fearless, just a great student leader. And we're so privileged to have her as part of our team, Miss Kit Hunter. Kit?
Thank you, Marcus. Can everyone hear me perfectly fine? Thumbs up. All right, sounds good. So my name's Katray Hunter. I also go by Kit. I am an RA in Housing 1, and I'm a senior this year. I also used to work with Dr. Carr in the Career Education Development Office. So it's really nice seeing all the familiar faces. As far as the topic that we discussed today about dismantling systemic oppression, I believe I didn't really notice it as much until my junior year, which was last year. So I know a lot of students know this, like your first 2 years of college is usually like basic classes, you can kind of float by or whatever. And then junior year just comes in and hits you hard. And as a woman of color, it's hard to reach out and ask for help. And in Dr. Carr's presentation with the image of the ladder and the person with the less pillars on their ladder, they needed extra assistance. And there's this weird, I guess, misconception for minorities that we have to be independent, we have to be strong, we don't have to ask for help. And I just want to let everyone know it's okay to ask for help, especially if you're a first gen or you're just new to anything. I'm a first gen student and I was in EOF, so trust me, I have a lot of people that look out for me and are always willing to just lend an extra hand. So yeah, it's just kind of hard to ask for help when you don't want to be another stereotype of not knowing how to do something or feeling like you can't perform the duties that you're expected to perform. And it's all about a learning experience. Like you can't know what you can't do until you obviously can't do it. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much for sharing. We appreciate you sharing your personal perspective. Up next, we have one of our newer RAs, but certainly someone who's doing a fantastic job with us. He's also an SOA, Mr. Jonathan Cologne.
Thank you, Marcus, and hello, everyone. As Marcus said, my name is Jonathan Cologne. It's actually my first year as an RA, and I've been at Stockton for 4 years. This is my fifth year now as a super senior. And just on the topic today of systemic racism, I come from a community in Camden, but I've gone to a school from ever since middle school where it was predominantly a white institution. And for me, being on scholarship there, I was always used to being sort of in a bubble where I could reach out to faculty and staff that didn't necessarily look like me, but they understood that there was an issue with like just focusing on that. So coming to Stockton, I kind of already was in that mindset of I'm already possibly going to be looked at as not as smart as my colleagues, my peers, and just the usual things that we keep as a community, like our chips on our shoulder, things like that. But going into Stockton, for me, my first years were definitely harder because I was a STEM major, taking biology and chemistry, and just not feeling like I really belong since I was the only really person of color in the room. And that sort of does definitely make you feel like you have to be by yourself. You have to get it basically and do it all by yourself. And it's a significantly big struggle. And I didn't realize how apparent that was until I did an internship with Cooper Medical School where everyone was a person of color. And it made me realize that it's very much possible, and building the study groups I did there, using the resources, it really does make a big difference. And yeah, it's something that, just trying to keep for short for time, that if I could get one thing out of what I'm saying is that we understand the problems and we know the systemic racism that's been here. And just that for me, the thing that I want to get out is to, sorry, I'm also just to feel belong, sense of belonging, find people that can help you and mentor you. As an SON, as an RA, I always reach out constantly, especially if I see someone like by themselves, because the worst thing, especially in this social climate, is the isolation. So thank you for your time. Just wanted to get that out there.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I think it is really important for us to recognize the importance of representation. So that's why we couldn't be more grateful for our two scholars today and what they had to offer. Our last RA who's going to actually speak is someone who's been working very closely with our office around diversity and inclusion and helping us with our programs. He is a second semester RA, and he can tell you a little bit about himself and his perspective, Mr. Daniel Lampkin.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Daniel Lampkin, as Marcus said. I work very closely with Marcus and Office of Residential Life as far as like helping to plan the programs that the freshmen see, like the larger scale programs that highlight diversity and the things that we may not talk about when we talk about diversity on a normal, like in a normal classroom setting. To piggyback off what John said, I feel like mentorship from other people of color is very important. I didn't have that my freshman year coming in, and I feel as if like I really needed that, especially as a young Black man coming into college, because like growing up in like a certain society and society that I grew up in, it was sort of like to be a young Black man, you had to like mask your emotions and try to basically be strong for everyone else around you, and people looked at you as that strong person. So you get to a point where your emotions start to build up so much that it's like, dang, so where do I turn to now? Because the fact that if I'm strong for everyone else, now who is strong for me? And so I really think that it's important that you find a mentor of color. In the university, like we have plenty of people that are willing and able to mentor you and to help you out, as long as you go to them and you're open with them and you have these conversations with them. So one thing I would say is just to find a mentor and be open to share your experiences with someone else.
Nicely stated. I want to echo that to all of you too, because I know Dr. Johnson's going to speak on that, so I'm not going to take up too much time because I see the clock. But thank you all for sharing your stories. Know that we value you, we validate you, and we are here for you every step of the way. And so with that being said, Dr. Johnson, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Marcus, and thank you to each of the students who shared their narratives with us today. At the start of this series, we heard from a lot of students who had painful experiences as it relates to their experience with oppression and racism. Today, as you heard at the start of this conversation, with shifting our conversation to social justice and how to promote that, it is particularly helpful to hear from students who have engaged in certain practices that they can speak to as helpful. So if you are on this Zoom and you're thinking about, well, how do I, address some of the things that I've heard from the presenters? How do I address the fact that it's going to be more challenging to land my dream job, or how challenging it may be to get into the field of the natural sciences, as Dr. Reeves talked about? Remember what each of your peers has shared, as well as the recommendations of your two speakers. Specifically, I want to highlight Jonathan's conversation about sense of belonging. Find the space that makes you feel like you belong. There are spaces on campus that reflect your identity, and when you find them, it's going to make a big difference. Kit talked about asking for help. Please put your pride aside. There are faculty, staff, administrators here, and fellow peers who want to help you. And they've done it, and they've done it well, so they are in a position to help you. So please take heed to that advice. And last but not least, then Daniel and his conversation about finding a mentor certainly ties it all together. Please do not walk through this experience at Stockton on your own. There are too many folks here who want to guide you through the process for you to do it alone. So thank you once more to all our student speakers, and to Marcus Johnson for coordinating these students who shared with us this afternoon. At this time, as we move into the last part of today's conversation, our IT support person, Mark, is going to assist us with going into breakout groups so that you can continue this conversation in a way that is meaningful to you, in a way that you can share your stories and share what this means to you and how you plan to utilize it in your walk from this point forward.